The text came in just as the organist hit the first note. I was standing in the church vestibule, bouquet in hand, my army dress blues, perfectly pressed metals glinting under soft light filtering through stained glass. My husband-to-be was waiting at the altar, and behind the chapel doors I could hear our guests rising to their feet. Then my phone buzzed one last vibration before I silenced it. I glanced down. "I won't attend. You're a disgrace to this family." It was from my father. A lifetime of silence condensed into one final cut. I read it twice, then again. The words didn't change. The funny thing about heartbreak is that it doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it lands in your chest like a dull thud, like the moment before a car crash when you're too stunned to brace for impact. I just stood there, frozen in that small, beautiful room filled with flowers and ivory ribbons, staring at my father's message. I shouldn't have been surprised. He hadn't RSVP'd, he hadn't called, but I still believed foolishly that he'd show up. That seeing me in uniform ready to marry a man who respected everything about me might finally bring him around. My fingers trembled slightly. I'd faced down live fire in hostile territory, but nothing stung quite like this. Mark noticed, of course. He always did. He was standing just a few steps away, straightening his tie in front of the antique mirror, when he caught the look on my face. He walked over slowly, steady as always, and without a word, I handed him the phone. He read the text, his jaw clenched for just a second, then softened. He handed the phone back, kissed my forehead, and said the simplest thing. "Give it 2 hours." I blinked. "What?" Mark just smiled. That quiet, knowing kind of smile he wore when he was 10 steps ahead of everyone else. The same smile that had drawn me in the first time we met. He pulled out his own phone, tapped once, and lifted it to his ear. I didn't hear the words. He kept his voice low, calm. Whatever he said was brief. Then he tucked his phone back into his suit jacket, took my hand in both of his, and said gently, "Let's not give your father another inch of today. You deserve the whole thing." I swallowed hard, nodded. And then the doors opened. The moment I stepped into the sanctuary, the room fell into a hush. Not because of what I wore, everyone there already knew, but because of the way I stood. I had decided weeks ago that I wouldn't wear white. I would wear my uniform, my Army service uniform with its dark blue coat and crisp trousers. 4 ribbons on my chest, my unit insignia, and most notably, the silver oak leaves on each shoulder strap, marking me as a lieutenant colonel. It wasn't a political statement. It was personal. I wore it because I had earned every thread of it. And Mark loved me for it. He'd asked if I'd consider wearing the uniform, not because it was impressive, though it was, but because, in his words, you fought too hard to hide who you are. My father, on the other hand, had once called it a costume for people who didn't know how to be women. That hurt never quite healed. But today, I didn't flinch. I walked toward the man who saw me, really saw me, and married him in front of the people who mattered. The ceremony was simple, sacred. I didn't cry, not until Mark reached up and touched the back of my hand during the vows, his thumb grazing over the callus near my trigger finger, like he knew the exact path that had led me here. When we kissed, I felt whole. It wasn't until the reception that my phone found its way back to me. I was halfway through my first dance with Mark at last, playing soft and slow behind us, when my maid of honor rushed up with wide eyes. "Rachel, your phone's been going crazy." I took it from her and felt my breath catch. 58 missed calls, all from one number. "Dad." Mark raised an eyebrow when I showed him. He smiled again this time, with just a flicker of irony. 2 hours, he whispered. And just like that, I realized something had changed. My father's name carries weight back home. Judge Harold Whitmore, retired circuit court third-generation attorney expert in constitutional law, and proud patriarch of what he liked to call a legacy of logic and discipline. He raised me like a courtroom assistant, strict expectations, no leniency. My childhood was a well-oiled debate prep. He'd quiz me during dinner test. My memory of case law, I never wanted to know. Every good girl moment was graded. Every misstep deconstructed like cross-examination. But I was also my mother's daughter. She was a quiet force in our home, an elementary school teacher with a soft voice and strong eyes. When she passed away from cancer during my sophomore year of high school, something in me split cleanly down the middle. Dad wanted me to go to Yale. I enlisted instead. It was a month after 9/11. I walked into the Army recruiter's office the day after my 18th birthday and signed the papers. When I told my father, he didn't speak. Not for 5 minutes. Then he said flatly, "You're throwing away your future. This is what people do when they have no plan." I wanted to shout that I did have a plan, just not his. But instead, I left the house duffel bag in hand and didn't look back for 2 years. Basic training was a shock to the system, but it also felt like freedom. I thrived in the structure, the clarity, the no-nonsense chain of command. Unlike my father's court, the Army's rules weren't wielded like weapons. They were survival. I rose quickly. Deployments, commendations, leadership training. I discovered I had a head for logistics and a spine for chaos. While Dad filed briefs in mahogany courtrooms, I was coordinating convoy routes through hostile terrain. We barely spoke for over a decade. When I returned from Afghanistan the first time, I sent him a photo of me receiving a Bronze Star. No reply. The next time we crossed paths was at my cousin Leah's wedding. I was in uniform out of convenience more than ceremony. I'd come straight from a military base. When I walked into the church, Dad was mid-conversation with a family friend. He saw me visibly stiffened and said nothing. During the reception, he avoided me entirely. I remember standing near the cake table, watching him laugh with Leah's new in-laws, thinking he can accept strangers, but not me. Still a part of me hoped that with time his anger would soften, that maybe, just maybe, when he saw the headlines, saw that his daughter wasn't some dropout in fatigues, but a respected, decorated officer, he might feel something other than shame. When I met Mark, that hope flickered back to life. Mark wasn't military. He was practical, thoughtful, analytical, an architect by trade, a quiet champion of people who didn't need to raise their voice to command a room. He met my father once, 6 months into our relationship, over a tense lunch I'd orchestrated back home. Mark wore a blazer. I wore a polite smile and my best attempt at neutrality. Dad barely looked at either of us. When we told him we were getting married, he raised his glass and muttered, "Don't expect me to sit front row at a camouflage ceremony." It wasn't camouflage. It was Class A dress, the kind worn for funerals, for medals, for the highest of honors. But to him, anything not in a white gown was a humiliation. He made it clear if I insisted on parading around like a soldier instead of a bride, he'd boycott the event entirely. And that's exactly what he did. Which brings me back to the text message. "I won't attend. You're a disgrace to this family." The message wasn't shocking, but it still cut. Not because I needed his approval, I'd lived long enough without it, but because part of me still wanted to believe he could change. But maybe he couldn't. And yet, when those 58 missed calls appeared during my wedding reception, I knew something had shifted. Something had forced his hand. And I had no idea what Mark had said or done to make it happen. After the reception, I slipped into the bridal suite while guests mingled over cake and coffee. The dress uniform that had once felt like armor now felt heavier than usual. The metal on my chest pulled against my posture, reminding me of everything I'd earned and everything my father refused to see. I sat on the tufted bench bouquet beside me, scrolling through the missed calls. All 58 were from my father. The voicemail started out terse. "Rachel, call me when you get this." Then, I overreacted. "We should talk." Then desperation creeping in. "Rachel, please. Something's happened. I didn't know. Just call me." Mark knocked gently before entering. He stood in the doorway, tie-loosened jacket, unbuttoned, but eyes as sharp as ever. "Any word from the press?" he asked casually. I blinked. "The press." He sat beside me. "You might want to check your news alerts." I opened my phone's browser hands, slightly shaky, and typed my own name. And there it was. Front page of the Washington Chronicle's Profiles in Service column. Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Whitmore. The hero no one saw coming. A full feature. photo of me saluting beside my squad. A deep dive into my 16 years of service. My Bronze Star. The operation in Kandahar, where I coordinated the safe rescue of 14 personnel under enemy fire. My quiet nomination for the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I stared at the screen. My throat closed. I thought they weren't going to publish this until next month, I whispered. Mark nodded. They weren't. But after I saw the text your father sent, I called Jim McAllister. Said it was time. Jim McAllister, Mark's old college roommate, now an editor at the Chronicle. I looked at my husband. You leaked it. I expedited the truth, he replied. Your father wanted to make this day about disgrace. I figured the world should know who you really are. I didn't say anything, just leaned into him, forehead against his shoulder. And Mark added, I may have CC'd a few friends at the Atlantic. Oh, in the governor's office. I laughed. A soft, broken kind of laugh. You declared a media war on my wedding day. He kissed my temple. No, I just leveled the battlefield. By the next morning, the story had gone viral. Dozens of media outlets reposted the article. Former commanders and service members tweeted their support. A retired general wrote, one of the finest officers I ever had the privilege to serve beside. The calls kept coming. My phone couldn't keep up. And neither, it seemed, could my father. By noon, his name lit up my screen again. This time, I answered. Rachel! He exhaled, his voice strained. I had no idea. The article. I noticed I said flatly. There was a pause. Then, what I said? What I texted, it was out of line. I didn't understand what you'd become. No, I said softly. You didn't want to. He was quiet for a long time. I've made a mistake, he admitted. Can I see you? I hesitated, then gave him the name of the cafe down the block from our venue. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Thank you, he breathed. I hung up, told Mark. He nodded. You sure you want to do this? He asked. I'm not sure of anything, I replied. But I'm tired of carrying the silence. The cafe was quiet sun streaming in through the windows. I arrived, first ordered tea, and sat by the window. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. Not because he looked different. Still tall, still rigid, still in his charcoal gray suit and pressed shirt, but because the look in his eyes had shifted. There was no fire, no edge, just something I'd never seen in him before. Hesitation. He sat, cleared his throat. Rachel. I raised a hand. Before you say anything, I said calmly, I want you to understand something. What you said yesterday, what you've said for years, has hurt me. Not because I needed your permission to live my life, but because I wanted your respect. And every time I reached out, you pulled away. He bowed his head. I know. You didn't just miss a wedding, I continued. You missed a lifetime of becoming. His hands clenched on the table. I thought I was protecting you. I thought the military would break you. It didn't, I said. It made me. He looked up at me and his voice was thick. I see that now. There was no apology after that, not yet. No dramatic gesture or tears. But when he asked if he could come to the post-reception brunch the next day, just to sit in the back, I said yes. Not for him, for me. Because I wasn't going to shrink myself anymore to fit into someone else's definition of who I should be. Not even if that someone was my father. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father had spent 40 years building a career in the courtroom, a place where every word was weighed, every fact dissected, and every truth tested under pressure. He lived and breathed due process precedent, the rule of law. And yet, when it came to me, his own daughter, he had rendered his judgment long ago, without evidence, without appeal. Guilty of not being the daughter he imagined. He saw my military service as rebellion, a detour from the carefully charted path he'd prepared since I was 5. He thought he was raising a litigator. I became a soldier instead. In his mind, that was the same as failure. But the world had changed, and now for the first time, it wasn't just me saying so. The article that Mark had pushed forward had ignited something I hadn't expected, a ripple effect. Within 48 hours, 3 different media outlets requested interviews. Veterans groups reached out. I was invited to speak at the upcoming Defense Women's Leadership Summit. I hadn't responded to any of them yet. I wasn't sure I was ready. But others responded for me. My former CO General, Roberta Gaines, now retired, posted a personal essay titled, "The Soldier You Didn't See." In it, she described a deployment in Kandahar when our communications failed during a ground raid. How I'd manually recalculated our extraction coordinates while under indirect fire, leading the team out under cover of darkness. She ended it with a sentence that stopped me cold. She didn't just serve with honor, she led with grace. If I had a daughter, I'd want her to be Rachel Whitmore. The comments exploded. And then came the calls from D.C. First from a White House staffer, then from a retired senator who'd worked closely with Veterans Affairs. There had been internal discussions, they said, quiet ones, about elevating Rachel Whitmore's story to a national level. The Medal of Freedom nomination wasn't just symbolic anymore. It had bipartisan support. The president himself had been briefed. Meanwhile, back in my father's corner of the world, things were unraveling. A local paper ran a headline, "Veteran Hero. Snubbed by prominent retired Judge Wedding Day, fallout raises eyebrows." The piece didn't name him directly, but everyone knew. In our small town, the Whitmore name wasn't anonymous. It carried weight now dented. Mark's quiet PR efforts had made sure of that. I hadn't asked for revenge. But I couldn't deny the odd sense of balance it brought. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I just watched from the sidelines as the man who had dismissed my life's work was suddenly forced to reckon with it in public view. That Sunday at the brunch reception with our closest friends and family, my father arrived. He came alone. No entourage, no press. Just him, a navy suit, and a gift box he handed to Mark, not me, as if to show he understood his access was limited. He stayed at the back, speaking little, sipping coffee. When I glanced his way during the toast, our eyes met. He nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something. Later that week, I returned to my base to tie up loose ends before transferring to a new civilian military liaison post. My phone rang during a planning session. It was General Gaines. "Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore," she said with her trademark rasp. "You're being considered for a position on the Joint Veterans Reform Task Force. We need strategic minds with field experience. Interested?" I was stunned. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Well then," she said, "get ready. The president's expecting a shortlist next month." That evening, I sat with Mark on our back porch, feet up, sipping bourbon. "Did you ever think it would come to this?" I asked. He gave me a wry smile. "Honestly, I didn't expect a text from your dad to trigger a national nomination, but I did know one thing." "What's that?" He turned to me, serious now. "You've spent your entire life proving your worth to someone who was never ready to see it. Now the whole world sees it, and he has no choice but to open his eyes." I leaned into him, the weight of it all beginning to settle. "He's trying," I said quietly. "Let him," Mark replied. "But don't carry his shame anymore. It's not yours." I didn't answer right away, just let the truth of it wash over me. Because he was right. And for the first time, I wasn't carrying anything I didn't choose. He stood just outside the ballroom. Pressed suit, polished shoes, shoulders squared like always, but there was a hesitancy in the way his hands fidgeted, how his eyes scanned the floor like he didn't quite know where to step. For a man who had spent a lifetime commanding courtrooms and dictating verdicts, he looked strangely small. I spotted him through the glass doors before he saw me. The sun was setting behind him, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Guests inside the reception hall were laughing, dancing, raising champagne glasses. The sound of a jazz quartet filtered through the open doors. This was supposed to be our first night as husband and wife, untouchable by the past. But I walked toward him anyway. Mark met me halfway. "He's been standing out there for 15 minutes, he said gently. I nodded. "He asked for me." "No. Just said he didn't want to interrupt unless you allowed it." That more than anything caught me off guard. I stepped through the doors, heels clicking lightly against the tile. He looked up when I approached, a faint intake of breath, betraying whatever rehearsed stoicism he'd planned. "Rachel," he said, voice rougher than I remembered. You look. Don't, I said. Don't start with pleasantries. Not today. He nodded. Okay. A long pause stretched between us. The evening air was cool. My uniform still held the warmth of the dance floor, but my hands were cold. He cleared his throat. I was wrong. I blinked. I was wrong, he repeated slower this time. About all of it. The military. You. That uniform. I thought I was protecting you from something harsh. Turns out you were running toward it with more honor than I've ever shown in my life. I watched him closely. And what made you decide that the article, the headlines? His shoulders slumped. Yes and no. I think I always knew. I just didn't know how to face it. You didn't have to know everything I said. You just had to show up. He looked at me, then really looked, and I saw the crack in the foundation. Regret. Not theatrics, not excuses. Just a man who'd realized too late that pride is a lonely companion. I read everything he said. Your records, the citations, the letters from your commanding officers. I saw the interviews. I saw you. No, I said, my voice steady. You saw the version of me that the public loves, but I'm still the same woman who came home in uniform and stood by the fridge waiting for you to say something. The same woman who mailed you graduation photos, promotion announcements, even invitations. You threw every one of them in the trash. He looked away, jaw clenched. So why now, I asked? Why today? He took a slow breath. Because today, for the first time, I realized the loss was mine. I didn't answer right away. Inside, I heard the MC announce the cake cutting. Laughter followed. Outside, it was just us. After a long silence, I said, I'm not here to absolve you. I didn't ask for this confrontation. I know, but I also didn't plan my life around your forgiveness. He nodded. And if you want to be part of my life now, it'll be on my terms. Respect first. Apology second. And you don't get to skip either. Another pause. Then very quietly, I'm sorry. I exhaled. It didn't fix anything, but it mattered. I turned toward the reception hall. He didn't follow. Can I? He asked, gesturing toward the door. No, I said gently. Not tonight. Tonight is mine. But there might be a tomorrow. I'm not promising, but I'm not slamming the door either. He accepted that, didn't press. Thank you, he said. I walked away. Back inside, Mark was waiting near the dance floor, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. I stepped into his arms, and he kissed my forehead. How do you feel, he asked. I considered it, like I'm done dragging dead weight. We clinked glasses. Then we danced again, not like people escaping something painful, but like people stepping into something free. I didn't hear from my father for several weeks after the reception. No calls, no letters, no backhanded comments from extended family. And that silence felt different. Not like the old kind, the heavy punishing kind that came after I joined the army. This was lighter, hesitant, as if for the first time he knew the ball was in my court and wasn't sure if he had the right to touch it again. Meanwhile, life moved on, fast. I officially transitioned out of active duty 2 months after the wedding, accepting a federal appointment as an advisor for military reintegration programs, a hybrid civilian role that let me use my field experience to shape how soldiers return to life back home. The work was complex. The systems were messy. The gaps between bureaucracy and human need were wide. But I was good at building bridges. I always had been. My first big assignment was reviewing a backlog of complaints from veterans struggling to access benefits. I noticed trends. No one else had inconsistencies in regional review boards, algorithmic bias in service history, scoring poor communication between departments. So I built something. A streamlined framework, a digital portal with accountability triggers, a process where no one's paperwork could disappear into a black hole. Within 6 months, delays dropped by 40%. Approval accuracy improved. Cases that once took a year were resolved in weeks. The Pentagon took notice. So did the White House. The day I was invited to speak at the Defense Women's Leadership Summit, I nearly turned it down. Not because I was nervous, but because I wasn't sure what I wanted to say. It wasn't until I reread the email, the part where they called me a pioneer, that I realized something. They didn't want a soldier's speech. They wanted the woman who wore her uniform to her wedding, who stood on principle when even her own family walked away. So I stood behind the podium, looked out at the sea of uniforms and sharp eyes, and said, I didn't join the military to make a statement. I joined because I believed in service. But somewhere along the way, I learned something bigger. Family isn't defined by who you share a name with. It's defined by who shows up. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned and earned again every day. And sometimes the hardest oath you ever take is the one to respect yourself when others won't. They gave me a standing ovation. But more than that, they gave me validation. Not just as a soldier, not just as a woman, but as someone who had survived judgment and emerged whole. A few days later, I received a letter. A thick envelope, cream-colored, addressed in neat handwriting I recognized instantly. My father. I opened it with steady hands. Dear Rachel, I've spent most of my life believing that to lead meant to be right. But watching your story unfold taught me something far more valuable, that true leadership begins where pride ends. I've stepped down from my final board appointments. I've donated to veterans' charities anonymously, including one in your name. I'm not asking for reconciliation. That is your right to grant or not. But please know I see you now. Fully. And with the deepest respect. Dad, there was no phone number, no contact info. Just his words. For the first time in my life, they were enough. Weeks later, I sat with Mark on the edge of our back deck, watching dusk settle over the yard. He reached for my hand. You okay? He asked. I nodded. I think so. It's strange. I used to dream about getting the last word, proving him wrong, forcing an apology. And now I realize it was never about the apology. It was about not needing it anymore. He squeezed my hand. You kept your oath, he said, to serve, to lead, and to yourself. I smiled. I guess I did. And just like that, I felt the chapter close. Not with a slam, but with grace. The Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony took place in the East Room of the White House on a brisk autumn afternoon. The room was filled with press dignitaries and a handful of recipients whose accomplishments dwarfed mine in their own way: scientists, civil rights leaders, public servants. I sat between a Nobel laureate and a former ambassador, my dress uniform crisp, my posture straight. When they called my name, I rose with purpose, not pride, purpose. The president shook my hand, smiled warmly, and said quietly, "The country thanks you, Colonel." As the medal was placed around my neck, the applause echoed not just in the room, but in my memory. For every mission, every soldier, every silent night in a far-off desert where I'd wondered if anyone back home even remembered my name. They did now. In the back row of the audience, I saw him. My father. No camera caught him. No reporters quoted him. He didn't try to approach. He simply sat there, alone, hands folded, eyes glassy. He looked smaller than I remembered, but not weak, just humbled. After the ceremony, I exited into a side hall and found him waiting near a marble pillar, away from the crowd. "Rachel," he said, voice gravelly. "Dad, I didn't come to make a scene. I just wanted to witness it, to see you honored the way you always should have been." I nodded. "You did." He hesitated. "I know I can't fix what I broke, but seeing you up there today, it broke something in me too, something that needed breaking." I studied him, not as a daughter looking for approval, but as a woman deciding what she would and would not carry forward. "You didn't just miss the wedding," I said. "You missed everything that led to it. The woman I became in the absence of your blessing." His eyes filled. "I know." A pause. Then finally, I said, "I'm not here to rehash the past, but I do believe people can change if they want to." He nodded. "I want to." "Then start by listening." "I will." We walked the hallway in silence. No grand forgiveness, no sweeping reconciliation, but side by side. And for now, that was enough. Over the next year, the nonprofit I launched expanded rapidly. We began offering mentorship programs for female veterans re-entering civilian life. We partnered with universities, employers, mental health organizations. We called it Second Oath, because that's what it felt like, a chance to recommit to life on your own terms. Mark stood by me every step of the way. He never pushed, never tried to speak for me, never made himself the center of the story. But he was the reason I'd found a new way to write it. Then one spring morning, as we were packing for a speaking event in Boston, my phone buzzed. A message from my father. I've just completed the first mentorship session at the VA Center. I'm teaching young men how to advocate for themselves in legal settings after service. It's humbling work. Thank you for showing me how to serve. I stared at the screen for a long time before showing it to Mark. He smiled. That's a different man than the one who texted you on our wedding day. I nodded. Yes, and so is his daughter. Later that evening, I stepped onto another stage. Another room full of veterans and advocates. Another chance to share what I'd learned. And I told them this. Revenge is easy. You just let the fire take over. But redemption is a choice you make every single day. Sometimes the person you're saving isn't them. It's you. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had answered that first message with fury. If I'd lashed out, burned every bridge. Maybe I would have felt righteous for a while. Maybe it would have tasted sweet. But it wouldn't have lasted. Because the truest power isn't found in tearing things down. It's found in building something stronger in their place. A life, a legacy, a name that finally means something to you, even if it never did to them. To those of you listening, maybe you've been told you're a disgrace. Maybe someone you love refused to show up. Maybe they still don't see you. But hear me now, you are not the sum of their silence. You are who you choose to become and how you rise after being pushed away. So if this story moved you, take a breath. Share your story in the comments. Maybe someone out there needs to know they're not alone. And if you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button, because we've got more to talk about. And this time, the spotlight belongs to you.